What's happening, everyone? This is Zach Edwards with another episode of the Adventure Box podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you. Now, this is all brought to you by Historical Conquest, the card game that, yes, it does teach you some things about history, but it's not about the history, it's about the fun. Try it out. Okay, go to www.historicalconquest.com. Now, to what we want to talk about. This is the Parthians taking over what used to be the Persian Empire. This is, well, we will also talk about some other things such as when Persia comes back. So these are all things we're going to be talking about today, and we'll even end it with the Islamic Caliphate that comes in. So starting off, for centuries, the Persians was the heart of some of the most powerful and influential empires in the whole world. The fall of the Seleucid, which we talked about on Monday. Remember, this is the Greeks that came down. Alexander the Great took over, and then the Seleucid was actually because of Seleucus the First. He was the general of Alexander the Great who took the largest portion of the Greek Empire that Alexander the Great had set up. Okay, so that's why it became the Seleucid Empire, not the Alexander the Great Empire. I never really understood that. It really should have still been, but what would you call it? Alexandria? Oh, wait a second. They have a place they call that. I don't know. Alexandrian Empire? Or maybe just make it easy. The Greek Empire. Well, the problem is that Greece was not Greece at the time. It was made up of a lot of different provinces. You had Athens, you had Macedon, you had a lot of different groups down there. And so you didn't have this overwhelming name such as Greece. And actually, that's here's an action item for everyone. Did not look this up beforehand. Please look where the name Greece came from and when it was first used. I'm actually quite interested. I will look it up as soon as I'm done with this podcast. So again, you have the Persian Empire, very, very influential. This is the Achaemenid Empire, which is then taken over by Alexander the Great and became the Seleucid Empire. But this just paved the way for what we call the Parthians. It's a group of warriors who basically rivaled Persian rule. They fought Rome for the dominance. They fought Persians. They fought basically anyone that would come in and try to take over. We talked about these, now not the Parthians exactly, but we talked about all the different tribes that were nomadic tribes and how they would come in and take over different lands and they would move around. Well, the Parthians were able to do some of the same kind of thing. So the Parthians would then come to what's known as the Sassanian Empire. Basically a dynasty restored by Persia. So this is the second rise of Persia. And this created a golden age of culture and science in Persia. But, again, like every empire, even the great Sassanian, you can think of Sassanian Empire fell to the Islamic Caliphate. The forces that came across Persia and much of the Near East. Let me bring up the map. They came from this area, the Sinai Peninsula, came up into Iraq, Iran, all these different areas, and they took over basically this by force, and even into Egypt and much of northern Africa. Go back to our ancient Africa portion, and you'll see where the caliphates come in. We talk about it a lot there. And also when we talk about ancient Egypt, we talk about the caliphates going in there. We don't go as much because it's not exactly ancient, because it's around 650. I'm just throwing this in because right now in Iran, or in what used to be Persia, is mostly Islamic. Okay, so this is what we're going to be talking about today. Let's start off with the first one, the Parthian Empire. This is the rise of the Persian power, but not of Persia, the Parthians. Now, the Parthian Empire emerged from the ashes of the Greek rule, when the Seleucid, the empire that Alexander the Great started, began to weaken. Again, it's what happens when you stretch out too far. Now remember, a general took one portion of it, and other generals took other portions of it. So there was a lot of infighting. So they weakened. For this reason, the Parni, it's a nomadic group. We have not talked about it before. But the Parni came in from Central Asia. So they came down from Turkmenistan and that area. Now, that was not actually a place at the time, but they came from this area, Central Asia, and started to take over. They started to reclaim Persia. Okay. You're like, that's great for Persia. No, it's not, because they're not Persians. They're outsiders that try to take over for Persia, take back the land from Persia. So around 247 BC, his name was Arsaces the First. He was the leader of the Parnis. He defeated the Seleucid in this area that were controlling at this point just over Persia. Then they came into Mesopotamia and also basically took over much of Asia. Of Central Asia. Well, Central Asia. That's up here. But also took over much of the Near East. There we go. That's a better way of putting it. So by 141 BC, they had taken Babylon, and Seleucia, which is basically the city that they put up in the Seleucid Empire, pushing the Greeks out of Persia forever. They're gone. Bye-bye. And also out of Mesopotamia, part of Syria, part of Turkey. So I have a picture for you. I'll show you this. It's not the best picture that you see, but you can see the boundaries of their rule. So this is the Parthians at the peak of their time. Now I actually got a better picture. This is the Parthians. Okay. So, and this is not the peak. This is around 080 or 180. So at this point, you have all of this being controlled by who? By the Parni, or the Parthians. That's what they were called. So now let's go into the Parthians, because this is 141 BC, which is also around the time that the Romans started to become a thing. They had a rivalry. The Parthians became the greatest rivals to the Romans, not the Greeks. No, the Greeks basically got enveloped by the Romans early on. So they were constantly in battle over the dominance over the Middle East. So if you remember, Roman rule came right around into the Canaans and down into Egypt and a lot of northern Africa. The Parthians came in and kept on fighting with them. That's why the difference between this picture, as you can see, they stretch out there, and this one stretched out a little bit further. This one actually got pushed back because, again, this is when the Romans ruled. But look at that neck. That's a fairly narrow neck. If you push out your boundaries just a little bit, you can basically collect all of Mesopotamia. The vegetated area, the highly vegetated area, again, more than Persia, this had vegetation. This had food. So they needed to keep this. The Parthians fought with the Romans so much that I found this picture, and it's the best one we could figure out when it comes to getting this out. This is actually the Parthian Empire and the Roman Empire. Don't matter about the dates; they're wrong. But it just gives you a little bit of understanding of how much the Romans took over, and the Romans actually took much of the buffer zone. The Parthians actually had more of Mesopotamia, but they continued to fight between the Romans and the Parthians during this time. And there's a lot of different. This is actually called the Roman-Parthian War, which we'll go over when we go through Rome. We could do it right now, but we're not focusing on the Parthians. Again, we're focusing on Persia. Okay, so let's talk about some of the things that they did. The Battle of Carrhae. It was a massive Roman invasion led by Croesus. And it basically was annihilated by the Parthians. They came in and they could not take them over. And I don't think it's on this map. Not that I could see. Okay. But the Romans continued to get ransacked by this group. Again, it's like the Scythians. People were afraid of them. The Romans continued to try to win over that land, but in the end could not. So, let's go through, let's see, the Parthians. Another thing that you should know, the culture of them, culture when it comes to warfare at least, is they were horse archers, much like the Scythians. And I can't remember the other group that was there, but they believed in hit and run tactics, making them nearly unbeatable in open battle. So they had to do other things to be able to fight them, most likely starving them out, those type of things. So they would take lands from them that would cut off their food, and they would starve them out from certain areas. There's all different things that they could do. So the Parthian government, though, so you know, they ruled through a feudal system, much like India, much like they weren't feudal. Europe were basically powerful. I think India was as well. We're just editing that curriculum right now, so I'll go more into that when we get into the Indus Valley, and that's I think May. But this is where noble families, the satraps, the governors, controlled the different regions and parceled out certain parts of the land that you had to pay them tribute. Now, the culture, unlike the Greeks, they embraced Persian traditions, including a revival of Zoroastrianism. And that was their dominant religion. Again, monotheism. Romans, polytheism. Greeks, polytheism. So, this was also a great part of this rivalry because they believed in different things and did not want to be taken over by the others and being forced, much like the Greeks did, to believe in a polytheistic religion, or like the Persians did and believing in a monotheistic. Unlike Persia, though, Persia wanted, at the beginning, religious tolerance. Romans, Greeks, not so much. So by the 2nd century BC, or sorry, no, AD, sorry. By the 2nd century AD, the empire weakened due to its internal rebellion. That seems like that's like deja vu. Every single civilization, they start to fight internally. But they didn't just fight internally. They also had the Romans coming in and try to beat them down as well. So in 2024 AD, the last Parthian king was overthrown. His name, the person that overthrew him was Ardashir the First, who founded, what is this? The Sassanian Empire. This is the last great Persian dynasty before Islam came in. And they stretched from about 224 AD until 651 AD when the Caliphate started to come in. So let's go over the Sassanians a little bit. I do have an image. Yeah, it's not the best, but the Sassanian were all this. And the Sassanian were able to gather a lot of support. Now, at times they were able to come in and come to other areas. This is interesting, though. They actually came down to the Arab Peninsula to the very bottom. I would like to know a little bit more about that. Maybe you can look it up. Maybe I'll look it up after this. Okay. So the Sassanian Empire, do I have a better picture? Yeah, I do. The Sassanian Empire, this is actually, I'm going to wait on that. The Sassanian Empire was also very important. They were Persia's last great pre-Islamic dynasty. So for 400 years, they restored the glory of the Achaemenid Empire and created a golden age of science, of art, and religion. So they believed in their own God, they had their own art, and they had science. Now science, again, the Silk Road, which was the Royal Road, was still there. They were still trading ideas with everyone, with culture with everyone. So let's see, how did they rise? Okay, so we talked about Ardashir the First a Persian nobleman. He rebelled against the Parthians from inside. And then, after able to make them unstable, he declared himself king of kings. In 224 AD, he built a centralized empire. Now, it did not stretch like anyone else, because again, you still had the Romans over here. The Romans made the Parthians fall, but the Sassanians, they didn't want to fall against them, so they basically took this narrow neck. Well, they took this narrow neck, they expanded out here, and started taking over this area. It's probably because of them that the Islamic Caliphates were able to take over so much easier, not just in the Arab Peninsula, right here, but into Iran, Iraq, Turkey, down to Egypt. I don't know. We will actually go through the Arab nations down here later on, and we'll actually learn the history of the Arab Peninsula later on, because that's also an interesting thing to see, is that all during this time, whether it was the Persians, the Mesopotamians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, they never ever really took over the Arabian Peninsula. Why is that? It's a good question for next time. Okay, let's go back to the Sassanians. The Sassanians, their culture and achievements. Let's talk about some of those. We already talked about this. Zoroastrianism. It became their state religion. Basically, if you didn't believe them, you're in trouble. So they had their fire temples built. They had ziggurats built. All these different things. Well, the ziggurats were, I think, there before them, but they did have their fire temples for their one god. They also made an advancement in medicine, astronomy, engineering, all these different mathematics, science. This made them the hub of the ancient world. Now, this would actually change. The hub basically went from here to all over the world. Africa was even a hub of all science and engineering for a time. This was, his name was Mansa Musa, and his Mali Empire was the hub of engineering, science, and such, scholarly. Okay, so they built the Taj Khasra, the largest brick arch in the world, as part of their imperial capital of Ctesiphon. Okay, so just actually, I want to find that. Let's find out what the Taj Khasra, where that is. So let's come here to the map. Type that in. That is right here. And boom, there we go. Now this is only a portion of the building that used to be there. Again, it is ruins, but they're trying to restore that arch, keep it going. So that is quite cool. You can see all these different images of their fire temples. Look at that. That's a major crack. I mean, you see that in your foundation, you say, oh, tear the house down. Nope, not this place. Again, it's ancient. There you go. Okay. And from a upper view, oh, look at that. The building's like they're just falling off. Oh, I want to see that someday. Again, where is it? Let's find out. Where is the Taj Mahal? It is in, I'm guessing, it's in Iran, right? No, it's in Iraq. I want to go see that. Except I don't trust Iraq right now. Not probably the most secure area. Okay. So, that's just some of the culture about it. Another thing, the Persian and Roman wars. Again, we're not going to go over this until not going to go over it much in this because we're talking about Persia. But Persian-Roman war was mostly done by Rome trying to take over that land as well. This is also not ancient times. So again, another reason why we're not going into it that much. We will talk about it when we go into the Middle Ages. and such. But for 4 centuries, the Sassanian battles basically went against the Byzantine Empire. This is after Rome, around 2 to 300 AD on. Now, King Khosrow the First, he expanded the Persian power, nearly defeating the Byzantines for a time. This is around 531 to 579 AD. This is when he was in power. So he actually took on the Byzantine Empire. But he was not able to take over Constantinople until the Caliphates came in. But endless wars, again, what they do? They weakened Persia. And by the 7th century, 600 and something, both Persia and the Byzantines were exhausted. Okay, so what happens when you have 2 exhausted empires? You create a vacuum. You create an area where somebody else can step in. Can. Not to say they will, but can. And they did. This is the fall of the Seleucids and the rise of the Islamic Caliphate. The Islamic, or is basically Islam. So 636 AD, the Muslim Arabs, right here, they unite under the Rashidun Caliphate. Let me show you the other picture. Better when it comes to this. The Rashidun Caliphate. And they basically secure the whole Arab Peninsula. But not Persia. But they do launch a massive invasion. This is the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah. Sorry if I'm totally probably mispronounced that. 636. This is right after Muhammad dies. The Sassanian army suffered a crushing defeat at this point. And so because of that, by 651 AD, the last Sassanian king, his name was Yazdegerd III, was killed, and this basically marked the end of Persia pre-Islam, the pre-Islamic Persia. Now, I know, as I said, this is not the Middle Ages. We're not talking about the Middle Ages. We're talking about ancient times. But I wanted to share this with you because this basically brings it all together. We're talking about all these empires that take over. This is when the Caliphates come in. Byzantine Empire, they fight for the land as much as possible. They lose Egypt over time. They then lose a lot of the Near East up into Turkey. You have the Sassanian Empire and you have the Rashidun. The Sassanian Empire is what's in Persia. That's why they're important. Okay, so with the fall of the Sassanians, Persia entered a new era under Islamic rule. But rather than disappearing, Persia, their culture, their religion, everything, basically thrived and adapted under a caliphate, Islam. But here's the thing. Here's the big thing. A lot of people would like to tell you that Persia, that the Islamic rulers at this time were basically allowing people to have religious tolerance. It wasn't true. They had pressure campaigns, higher taxes for people that did not agree with them. And so by doing this, they created a lot of conversions, because another thing they could do, by taking over your land, they could actually sell you into slavery. They had no problem with selling you into slavery, because this is basically where slavery as a institution begins. And this is where they start taking over these lands, whether they're Byzantines, so they could be Europeans, they could be Zoroastrians, doesn't matter. Anyone that was not part of Islam, because if you're Islamic, they could not sell you into slavery. They were not allowed to. They could sell you into slavery. And so they sold you all over the world, throughout their empire, through all the Asian empires, through Africa, they sold. Now, at the same time, the Byzantines did a lot of the same thing. And they take prisoners and they would sell them into slavery as well. So now, Persian influence, we're not going to talk about as much. but we'll also, later on, we'll be going over the Umayyad and the Abbasid Caliphates. Persian scholars basically lead the Islamic golden age in this time, in this place. But this is actually a little bit after this. I just wanted to show you that how the Rashidun Caliphate in the Arab Peninsula after Muhammad died, then stretched into the Sassanian Empire, took over this to be able to create a caliphate up here. So the Sassanians fell to allow for Islam to thrive in that area. And then they took over much of Byzantine Empire, including Egypt, up into here and even to this city right here. I don't know if you read it. It says Constantinople, which then became Istanbul. So Constantinople is no longer Constantinople. It is now Istanbul. Okay, so there you go. That is the fall of Persia. Sad as it may be, sorry that it happened. All empires fall. The caliphates also fell. Now you have different countries in all these different places. Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, all these different lines. You also have, again, the area, the state of Israel, which to some is seen as a nation, as a country, but others it is not. So let's go to my active question before I let you all go. Okay, so the active question is, what do you think was the greatest Persian empire? Was it the Achaemenid? Was it the Parthians? Was it the Sassanians? Or probably was it the Islamic Caliphate? Now, Persia has been ruled so many different times by so many different people. There's so many different cultures there. I'd like to understand what your thoughts are on the whole monotheism and polytheism that we talked about, and how different empires were accepted by different areas because of certain things. Now, the Caliphate, when they came in, again, they said religious tolerance, but if you weren't their faith, you would be taxed differently and more than anyone else. Also, if you wanted to trade with them, they would recommend highly that you would do it in Islamic law. So Sharia law. So all these different things. It allows the Islamic civilization coming from the Arab Peninsula to be able to stretch out quite quickly and grow. Again, Zoroastrianism is taken up monotheism, being Islam, to monotheism, which was Zoroastrianism. Now, in Persia, there is still Zoroastrianism today, but it's not as big as the Islamic power that's there, especially by the leadership of Iran. And that's something that we're having struggles with right now, is Iran and their influence over terrorism all around the Middle East and around the world. So, we're not going to talk about that until we get into more modern days. But stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for joining me as we talked about the fall of the Persian Empire. That's it. Next week we will be going into the Greeks. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining us and have a wonderful day. Take care, everyone. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.